Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Tony Cox. I'm the Chief Executive of UK Biocentre. I'll tell you a little bit more about UK Biocentre and what we do in a minute. The object of this talk is to invite you to think about samples and the way they are stored in laboratories, primarily in laboratory-based freezers, and just start thinking about how well that works for you. You know, whether those freezers are real assets or do they really present some underlying worries and what can be done about it. Before I go on, I would like to acknowledge and thank Biocentre for making this speaker slot available for us to talk to you. So very, very, very grateful to them. And moving on, I want to tell you a little bit more about UK Biocentre, what we do and why we're here, and the sort of services that we offer in the sample processing and storage service area. So UK Biocentre was set up in 2011 primarily as a sort of a spin-off from UK Biobank, which you're probably familiar with. UK Biobank developed a lot of large-scale processing and storage technologies to support the UK Biobank project, and more people were coming to Biobank asking about, the availability or access to those large-scale services. So Biobank then spun out UK Biocentre to make those services available primarily to the UK research and academic community, but more latterly into the commercial sector. Since 2022, UK Biocentre has been an independent company. We separated from UK Biobank, and we operate as a not-for-profit organisation, which means that we can be very competitive in the storage and processing arena. And our unique way of looking at processing is from an industrialised scale. So we are interested in supporting large-scale processing and storage projects. We implement large-scale workflows, often handling anywhere between 10 and 20,000 samples a day. So we know how to do large-scale processing and storage at scale. We routinely store 50,000 samples in our storage facilities each week. We have a committed team of staff at the UK Biocentre. We're located in Milton Keynes, so from a logistical point of view, ideally suited in the UK. And we have a backup facility just outside Oxford, where we store disaster recovery subsections of our sample collections, and also we have a very large liquid nitrogen facility where we have well over 100 liquid nitrogen tanks in that facility where we store samples in deep cold. So I'm not going to say an awful lot about sample processing today because I want to focus on storage. At Milton Keynes, we host more than 200 -80 freezers. A mixture of those belong to us, in which we store customer and collaborator samples, or we host our customers' freezers and look after them. In total, that's around about 4 million samples, and we provide a rapid picking and dispatch service from those freezers so that our customers can have very rapid access to their contents. And as I mentioned, in our backup facility just outside Oxford, we have more than 100 liquid nitrogen storage tanks for samples that need storage in deep cold, primarily cell lines and cellular material. The parallel part of our manual storage operation is our automated stores. We have 6 fully automated Biocentre BioStores on site. We're currently building, or Biocentre are currently building and commissioning a 7th store for us, which will give us a storage capacity in excess of 30 million samples on site. The automated stores really are the sort of the acme of sample processing. They give us the capacity to move, access and store very large numbers of samples, and it's not unusual for 20,000 sample movements to be happening within and among those stores each day. So it's a large scale operation, and probably the largest biobank, certainly in the UK and probably in Europe. So going back to the minus 80 freezers, I wanted to talk about how they work. And this is based on my experience personally as a student and working in the lab for many years, but also on, regular customer conversations about, the benefits, but also the horrors of working with minus 80 freezers. So minus 80 freezers, they look after your samples. Samples are the absolute vital part of all biological research, as we know. They need to be looked after and preserved very, very carefully. They're vital, but as we all know, those minus 80 freezers, they're multi-user. Everybody is in and out of them. For some reason, they're always full. I don't know why that is, but you never see much space in a minus 80 freezer. Because they are multi-user and they're very transactional, they're a real challenge to keep well organized. We have in our mind that a minus 80 freezers would look like this, but we all know that in a large number of cases, they actually look like this, don't they? Which takes me back to an observation and a sort of a memory lane thing around looking at minus 80 freezers when I was a student. And a minus 80 freezer could be classified in this sort of way. There was one shelf which had some absolutely essential, critically important, completely irreplaceable collection that nobody knew anything about, that had never been used in living memory, but of course couldn't be got rid of. And even if you wanted to get rid of it, it was encased in an ice glacier which prevented you from doing anything about it. There was a shelf that was devoted to postdocs who'd never been seen in the lab for years. There was, a melee of PhD students who would fight for half a shelf space, and there would be hand-to-hand combat over who managed to get their reagents in there. There was a restriction enzyme store, and I don't know about you, but I always found that those restriction enzyme tubes had 1 microliter of reagent in it, because if you used up the tube, you had to replace it. So there was a sort of graveyard of restriction enzyme tubes. There was always a bottom shelf which had all sorts of stuff in it. We had no idea where that came from or who owned it. My stuff was sort of sandwiched somewhere in the middle in a few inches of space. I mean, I'm making light of it, of course, but it's a common factor of the way that multi-user laboratories use minus 80 freezers. It's not optimal. Are there better ways of looking at these things? When we look at them, in all seriousness, minus 80 freezers do carry quite a significant overhead. They're a significant capital purchase. You could easily pay 10,000 or more pounds per minus 80 freezer. It's a big capital investment. They are really energy hungry, many of them. An average might be 7,000 kilowatt hours per year. That's a lot of energy. That's thousands of pounds worth of electricity each year. And of course, most of that electricity is actually converted to heat through the compressors. So not only have you got to pay to chill it, but then you've got to pay to take the heat away. An entirely non-trivial point is that these freezers are large, and if you have a collection of them, they consume quite a lot of space, often precious laboratory space. Maintaining the content, as we've just seen, is a challenge. I mean, that's not to say that there are many laboratories that have a very disciplined approach to maintaining an inventory of the freezer contents, but let's face it, it is always a challenge. And if you happen to be storing cellular material which is subject to HTA regulations, then unless that inventory is correct, there is a concern over potential liabilities about what could be happening in that freezer and who it belongs to, and how all of the ethical governance and sort of regulations are being observed around it. Freezers need maintenance. They need to be defrosted regularly, especially if they're used frequently. And also you need to pay special attention to, what happens if it breaks down? We're getting increasingly warm summers, and we see increasingly large number of customers who have challenges during the summer. So if your freezer suddenly stops working, what happens to all those samples? Where do they go? And last but not least, security. In a multi-user environment, many of those samples represent a very significant scientific and financial investment. They often represent very important IP or commercial assets to organizations, controlling security and access to those samples is very, very important. So something that is layered on top of all of the sort of the ownership concerns around holding -80 freezers. So with that in mind, what are there alternatives? Absolutely, yeah. You can do all of this, and a lot of laboratories do that. But I would say now, or I'd invite you to think about some of the alternatives that are available now, and a number of different services that are available to help alleviate some of these concerns. And I like to think of them as described really as samples as a service. These samples we offer come in many different forms. There are particular themes, but we blend them for individual customers depending on their specific needs. But some examples. So, some customers just want to get all of their freezers off-site. They want to have them hosted, and then but at the same time be able to access those samples. So, send in picking requests, have those samples picked, and then return to them next day if necessary, so that with minimal planning of laboratory activity, you can have regular, uninterrupted access to those samples in a very convenient way, which doesn't require you to have these big freezers sitting at the back of a laboratory somewhere. So you get back that space. You shed that management overhead and concern with looking after your freezer estate. Some customers choose to remove the majority of those freezers and keep just a small collection of freezers which are transactional. So the things that are frequently used, the current projects, the stuff that's going in and out every day. But the bulk of the collections, many of which are archival, move those to a site where those no longer become a day-to-day concern. You only retain those samples that you actually need for your current concerns. Another way of looking at this is to say, actually, I don't want to own freezers at all. I want to have my collection hosted in a set of freezers which aren't mine, but are managed, owned, and maintained by UK Biocentre. And that's an increasingly popular option for us, where customers just don't want the hassle of having to have that capital investment, have that maintenance overhead, and the concern. So it removes all of the overhead around maintenance, replacement, built-in disaster recovery, which comes as part of that sort of service, and a built-in recovery for those failures 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The ultimate endpoint for that, and the one that we are increasingly interested in promoting, is to actually move those samples out of individual -80 freezers and into fully automated storage. Fully automated storage is very large scale. It's very consistent. The temperatures are very well monitored. More than anything, it's a very efficient way of managing bulk collections. If you've got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of samples, then automated collection management is really the future. It's highly efficient, and access to those samples can be, next day in just the same way. It could be as if those -80 freezers were at the back of your laboratory. But it comes with excellent consistency in storage conditions, high resilience, and it's cost effective, particularly from an energy point of view. So I'd argue that automated storage really is a very serious alternative to a farm of -80 freezers sitting at the back of the laboratory. As part of the automated solution, all the tubes that go into the stores are managed through 2D or other custom barcoding. So there is complete integration between those samples in those tubes and the LIMS system, which provides full tracking and traceability at all times. The stores definitely offer better temperature homogeneity. They minimize thermal disruption as they're picked and samples are moved in and out of the stores. Very little effect on the remaining samples in those stores. It's fully robotic with high volume picking, where thousands of samples can be moved in and out of the stores every day. As I say, if you have archival collections that are going to be stored for a long periods of time, minimizing that thermal variation on your samples is very important over a period of maybe years, potentially even decades in some of the collections that we hold. So temperature stability is actually crucially important. Because of the nature of the stores, they're more reliable. They're extremely energy efficient compared to individual -80 freezers. You're not refrigerating any spare space. The density in the stores is extremely high. So where you might put 6 SBS racks of samples containing 500 odd samples in a tray, moving those to high density storage, you'll get well over 1,000 samples in the equivalent volume. So the storage capacity and therefore the efficiency, both in terms of space usage and energy usage, is much higher in automated solutions. And that makes for a better, more environmentally friendly solution, which is an increasingly important concern for many research organizations that are driven to be much more conscious of their energy use and their impact on the environment. My take-home message really is to invite you to think about the biological samples that you hold, how they are the foundation of much of bioscience, that their long-term maintenance and conservation of primary samples is absolutely crucial for your science, not only now but in the future, and to invite you to consider options that really preserve the quality of those samples over long periods of time in a way that is both energy and therefore cost efficient, maximizes their utility. These samples aren't frozen into a block of ice in the back of a -80 freezer. They are there ready for you to pick and request whenever you need them. So there are a range of alternatives now available to buying and simply filling -80 freezers at the back of the lab. Sample management services really can provide a range of very cost-effective, energy-efficient storage options that really help busy laboratories with important collections to manage those collections efficiently, to take away the overhead, the concern, the necessary brain power that's needed to make sure that those collections are safe and secure, and allowing laboratories to focus on the important bit, which is doing their science. It's really important to remember that just because samples are off-site doesn't mean that those samples are remote. We run our own courier delivery service, which is specific for the use of our customers alone. That allows us to move samples next day if necessary, right the way across the UK. Which means that we are not subject to the vagaries of third-party distribution, and it allows us to offer a very cost-effective and rapid service to our customers. So I hope that's given you a little bit of a flavour of the things that we think about a lot. -80 freezers, they're in every laboratory. You can consider them an asset. Sometimes I consider them a liability. There's lots of things going on in a laboratory all of the time. Having one less thing to worry about, and that is the state and condition of your samples and how they're going to be managed long term, shouldn't be one of them. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.